I wanted to do a follow-up from the last video. Seemed like I got a pretty good response. And I think it's really important to play with these three levels. And of course, again, everything I'm doing here is level one, but there's enough pointers in all of it for you to play around with this and experience it. And I think it's going to create some really interesting discussions. So I want to start off with a couple more exercises going from level one to level two, because that's the whole trick. We get good at that. And when we get good at that, then we apply that same principle to go from level two to level three. And so in class, sometimes I'll ask people, what is love? And of course, people do what you might expect. They use other abstractions. Love is an emotion. Love is a feeling. Love is passion. Well, what you've done is you've just stayed at that level one. And of course, poets go beyond this. And that's why poetry is so interesting, because it evokes something beyond level one. And what they do is they take level one and they attach it. They build a bridge to level two. So I'll read a few of these to you. So there's so much poetry about love. And they almost always do this. So this first one is from Mother Teresa. So love is a fruit, in season at all times and within the reach of every hand. Anyone may gather it and no limit is set. And we know something more about love. It's like the meaning is more obvious to us after we read that. Okay, here's another one, a little bit more contemporary. This is also from the 90s. Newman from Seinfeld. So love is a spice with many tastes, a dizzying array of textures and moments. Now you may question the poetic value of Newman. I hope you don't, but you might. But it doesn't matter, because it still gives us a little bit more. And the more that it's giving us is it's making that bridge from level one, the abstract, to level two, the material world. And so we find here that the material world is actually a pretty interesting place. It's almost like a necessary place if we're going to understand. And of course, there have been theorists out there who've said that metaphor is the foundation of understanding. So we can't understand until we attach something to this material world. And it's interesting that you see this even in science. Anytime poetry and science do the same method, that's kind of interesting. And I remember a time in grad school when it was a professor who does intelligence testing, and people would expect him to know what intelligence is. So he got hit with a bunch of questions. Yes, but what is intelligence? Well, if he said something, that's how smart, and he used better words than this, but he just kept using different words, and it got very frustrating, and everyone felt like it was going nowhere. And eventually he just pointed to his test and he said, intelligence is your score on my exam. And that stopped everybody, because it was from a confusion to all of a sudden crystal clear understanding. We knew exactly what he meant when he said intelligence, because we could see it. You can hold the test in your hands, and you knew what the questions you got right were and which ones you got wrong and what your total score was. And if someone got a 90 and you got an 80, you knew they had more of whatever this intelligence stuff is. So it was clear. And of course, that's why they call them operational definitions. In my class, I call them sensory definitions, because the operational part is there is this, like, well, how did you do it? Show me the stuff in the material world that you did to measure this abstraction. And so when you find something that is used so commonly both in science and poetry, it really speaks a lot about what it means to be a human being. And so we go from level one to level two as part of our human experience, whether it's poetry or science. So that transition seems to be really interesting. It seems to be behind the meaning of so much of our human experience. So the question is, can we use that same transitional process from one to two to go from two to three, the desert of the real? And I'm convinced that you can. And the process, again, starts with mindfulness, which is fascinating. They could have called the mindfulness movement the materialist movement, because everything about mindfulness and meditation, it's all materialism. Whether you're focusing on your breath, whether you're focusing on what it feels like to be in a body, and there's even a new discovery. It's called the default mode network, and I may talk about this. Let me know if you're interested in hearing more about it. But it's a set of brain structures that light up every time we're told to sit still and do nothing. And of course, that's virtually impossible for us as human beings, because if we sit still, our mind starts to wander. In other words, instead of doing what we're doing, being mindful, we start daydreaming. And of course, this, well, maybe not of course, maybe this is a surprise. I've done videos on this, but the default mode network and mind wandering and daydreaming, which is to say spending a lot of time in level 1, seems to be very causal in terms of being unhappy. And it seems to be far happier to stay at level 2, to stay in this materialistic world. So materialism is far from this evil that people talk about. Materialism may be a gateway to happiness. It may be the peace of mind that so many of us are looking for when you follow the materialistic world, whether it's through your breath or simply focusing visually on an object, or listening to the rain. Yeah, you can listen to the rain, and it can be just as a form of meditation as any, or going for a walk. The whole point is, are you walking or are you somewhere else doing something that you're not? So this materialistic world can be quite powerful. So why? What is so powerful about being in the now? What is so powerful about listening to the rain? Well, if we take that process from 1 to 2 and we apply it from 2 to 3, we find why the materialistic world is so valuable. It's valuable not in and of itself, but it's valuable as a pointer. In the same way that level 1 points to level 2, and we find this meaning, when we take level 2 and ponder it deeply, the same thing happens when we go from the abstractions and we get lost and we realize it's going nowhere. And as soon as we connect it to that deeper level, then we get, okay, I get this. This is meaningful. The same exact process happens when we are mindful of our body, when we're mindful of our breath, when we're mindful of the rain, or just a simple walk in the afternoon. You go for a simple walk and you're walking, and all of a sudden something very interesting happens. And that's because not only are you at where you're at and doing what you're doing, but what you're doing, when it becomes a point of contemplation, it starts going beyond what it is. And it points to a very, very mysterious place that I've been talking about, this desert of the real.